Today I want to do a little experiment, and what you see here is my Leica M10-P. It's a beauty of a camera, I love it. I already uploaded other videos where I used that camera. And one problem I have with Leica M lenses is there is basically no shift lens. There is an old R lens which you can mount with an adapter on the Leica M system, but I want to try my luck differently today, and I want to mount the lens from Nikon. And it's a very old school lens. I bought this second-hand at a second-hand photo shop, and I show you how it is called. It's the PC NIKKOR 28mm, widest open aperture is 3.5. The PC in the Nikon universe stands for perspective control, and that's exactly what I want here. So I will show later how this lens can be used, but basically you see it already here. I have the option here to shift the lens, and in that way creating a different image composition in architecture, for instance, without falling lines, which is what typically happens if you take your camera and in order to capture everything on the building you put it like this, and then your lines will just get distorted in the way optics works. And we can avoid this by a shift lens, and I will spend quite some time with that lens today and try it out. And for this you need an adapter. So here's the adapter. Novoflex, I think, is well known for making all kinds of adapters. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes these adapters are nonsense. And if you plug it out, it looks like this. And what you can do is, here you can mount that adapter on the M mount, on the Leica M, and here you can mount your Nikon lens. And I'm going to show this in a moment. Before mounting the shift lens from Nikon on my Leica M10-P, I want to show the different elements here. And there are two aperture rings here. One is a smooth ring, and one is a ring which cannot be moved because it's locked. And that's basically like a preset for the aperture or the f-stop. So I have to pull it down, then I can move it, and it clicks into the next f-stop. Now it's at f11. I pull it down, I move it, and now it clicks in at f8. What is this good for? So this ring here is the one which is actually controlling the f-stop and the aperture. And the ring on top of it is like a predefined range of apertures I'm allowing where this aperture can be opened up to. So in the setting now, I can open my aperture from f3.5 up to f8, but not beyond that. So it stays open up to a certain extent. And we can actually look this up here. I hope this can be seen on video. So now it's open at f3.5, and now I start to close it, and it stops at f8 because that's what I locked in on the upper aperture ring. Let's get this all the way close to f22. Let's open it up to 3.5. Let's look into the aperture, and now you see I can now close it beyond f8 and can close it up to f22. So you have a preset on your upper aperture ring, and you have the actual aperture setting on the lower ring. And by the way, it's very smooth, so videographers, filmmakers, they will like this because it's not clicking at the different f-stops, and you can have smooth aperture changes during video filming. The next element you have here is a distance scale and the focus ring. So here you can change your focus, and here is your focus point. It's that little point here in white, and then whatever you put on top is your focus distance. So in this case it's infinity, in this case it's 2 meters. Since this is a 28mm lens and the widest open aperture is f3.5, you typically get what you like in architecture, quite some depth of field. And let's see how this works. So let's open the aperture. Let's go to, with a click, to f8. Now we are at f8, locked in on the preset aperture ring. And now we close the aperture from 3.5 to f8. Never forget that this is the ring for the aperture actually controlling it. At the beginning I was focused on this ring, and it doesn't change the aperture at all. It's just a preset so that your aperture range here is from 3.5 to f8. So now you have closed it down to f8. And then if, for instance, you want to have your hyperfocal distance, you need to note that there are different colors here. Let's get this in the camera. So we have yellow, blue and orange. And this corresponds to yellow f8, blue f16, orange f22. So if I'm at f8 and I use the yellow dash, I have to place my infinity focus on top of the yellow dash, and then everything between close to 2 meters up to infinity will be sharpened in focus if I look at the yellow dashes. That's the way it works here. Then there is a shift, so the shift functionality works in one direction only, but the lens has a turning mechanism here. So you can basically, I hope you see this here, turn it when it is mounted on the camera, and then you can basically shift in all directions. So you can do this horizontally in both directions by turning the lens here and rotating. You can do it vertically, and in this way, of course, you can even create large panorama stitches by having a 2x2 matrix or a 3x2 matrix, or whatever you like, depending on you like more portrait or landscape format. And you can create high resolution pictures by stitching different shots together, and the different shots come from differently shifted parts of your image composition, and then in Lightroom, Photoshop, or in the software of your choice, you can compose them, get a high resolution, nice panorama. Now let's mount the Nikon lens on the Leica M10-P. First of all, maybe I should say that here, make sure you always have a lens cap here for the lens you are going to demount, because you don't want to have dirt and dust going into your lens. So we switch this off, we keep the Leica M10-P here, and we get some coverage and protection for that nice lens here. Then we have the adapter here. So the adapter, as I showed before, from Novoflex. Let's get the Nikon D hooded here. Let's get it on the lens. So there is actually not a good orientation here on those old lenses, but here we go. You turn it until it nicely clicks, and then we have to mount this on the Leica M10-P, and that is something which I think should be in a way that we get this here, and you see it's on. It also clicks nicely, and now it's mounted. So that's the way it is. As I told before, you have the rotation mechanism here. So now you can, for instance, stitch in horizontal direction. You can also turn this around and get vertical direction, which is what you would use for landscape, shifting up or down depending on how much foreground you want to have. So that's the way it works. I think it looks pretty nice if you look at the construction. Impressive in some way. An old school Leica M10-P, but a very modern camera with a modern soul and a very old school lens here. What I forgot to mention is that Nikon constructed these lenses here, so the 28mm PC f3.5 from 1980 on, and then stopped producing it in 2006. People say there are 30 to 40,000 of those lenses produced, so the second-hand market should have quite some supply for those of you who are interested to repeat my little experiment here and use it for architectural photography. So I'm curious to see how that combination of the NIKKOR 28mm, which was discontinued from production in 2006, on my Leica M10-P is capable of. But before I go to Zurich and make some sample shots and also, of course, present them here in the video later on, I want to mention a different option. So this is, let's have a look at this here. This is a Nikon tilt shift lens, PC for perspective correction. 19mm f4 is the widest open aperture you can have. And this has not only the shift functionality in both directions, it also has a tilt perspective correction. So if you want to play with depth of field and are familiar with using tilt lenses, then this might be even a better choice. But it's a very heavy lens if you look at this here on a Leica M mount, and probably the good thing about this is it's a very modern lens. I think Nikon has about 4 of them in their product offering currently. But I just think also from an aesthetic point of view, it doesn't match a Leica M. So I like this one here much more, and I will try my luck with this old second-hand used lens and see what I can get out of it when I will be in Zurich in a moment. So I'm now in Zurich. This is basically at the heart of Zurich here. It's a famous place. It's called the Frauenmünsterplatz because the church on the right hand side is the Frauenmünster. It's a very famous church, besides many reasons why this is a beautiful church. The famous artist Marc Chagall was painting the colored glass windows, and if you are in Zurich, it's worth a visit. So we are here with the Leica M10-P as we mounted the Nikon lens before. Let's show you how I set this up. I made it in hard aperture stop at f8. I basically turned the aperture at f8, and here on the Novoflex adapter I opened this up, so that should actually give me an f8 aperture. I also set it up to 1/250 seconds in the shutter speed, and my ISO value I basically placed at 100. I think that's good for these light conditions. So let's mount this on a tripod. Let's get this settled here. So it looks good. Let's get this adjusted so that we get it level metered. Challenging light conditions here, so my camera and my smartphone with which I'm taking the video are in the sun. The place in front of me is most of the time in the shadow, as you see it here, but the church itself and the church tower are in the sun. So it's I think, a good opportunity to demonstrate how we adjust for this in the menu. First of all, I should probably zoom this to make it more transparent for you. So let's go into the menu and let's go to drive mode. The first thing I want to have is I want to have a self timer with 2 seconds. The second thing I want to do is exposure metering, and I explained this in another video on the Leica M10-P. It's always wise to go to spot metering because then I can adjust. So that's what I did now here. And if I now have you see here this little spot indicator. If I move this down into the shadows, exposure starts to compensate, and I need to just hit it in a way that I get enough light in the shadows, and I think this is a good way of looking into this. Okay, and now the next thing I want to do is I want to shift the lens, and if you just look at the viewfinder now, you will actually see how the shift changes my build composition, and I want to reach at least the clock at the tower of the church, but I want to have a little bit of foreground here. Of course, since I shifted this now, I lost my exposure compensation from the shadows, as you see here, that spot metering indicator. So I need to go down to the shadows again to light this up a little bit and get some compensation on the exposure side. Now let's take the shot. Et voila, here's my picture. And later on in Lightroom, I'm going to quickly show the result, how sharp the second-hand lens is and how it dealt with the light conditions, and whether in combination with that M camera sensor it produced the result I was looking for. My location to illustrate the concept again. So what we see here now, let me just zoom this so that you can clearly see what's going on. Maybe a little more. So again, we have a situation where the foreground here is pretty dominating and the houses are cut off, and I don't like that, so I want to shift my lens to get the houses into my image composition and get part of the foreground away. Now again, we should use spot metering to compensate for light. I want to keep the structure of the sky here, but now I hope you can see it, at least the fountain is still not completely in the shadow, so I think that's the composition I want. Let's take the shot. And then later in Lightroom, we look at the result. I wanted to have this perspective in particular because there is on this side here, there is a construction site, and I want to check how much detail that lens in combination with the M camera sensor is giving me in those images. So here's one of the pictures we just took with that shift lens on the Leica M10-P. And I already did some adjustments here. I took back highlights completely in order to get structure in the sky, and the contrast between the shadow areas and the sunny buildings was just too big. If you would play with that, it gets even stronger on the sunny areas. And there's nothing bad in just turning highlights completely down to minus 100% here. Of course, all the adjustments I made are up to personal taste, and it's pretty tedious to make recommendations on how to adjust pictures in Lightroom, because some people like more colors that pop, some people like it more flattish, and it really depends how people like to have their images at the very end. What you see here is some of the details. So if we zoom in, this is now at 100% level here. It actually looks okay. So if we look at those chairs, quite clean. If we look at those letters here on the wall, quite okay. If we look at people moving or sitting, quite okay. I think it's a usable picture. If we look at those guys here, okay. Here in the corners, I think it is a little bit fuzzy. It's probably more smooth here, which happens on shift lenses in the corners, even if you close the aperture to f8. But in general, a usable picture if we would like that scene. I'm not going to use that picture. It was all about demonstrating how to mount a non-Leica lens on a Leica M body. And I think this is my concluding remark. You can do this at all times. There are lots of adapters for Leica M rangefinder cameras. And if you need a functionality like shifting, you can use one of the newer shift lenses from Nikon, for instance, or other brands. You can use old school second-hand lenses, and it might give you some reasonable results. But in general, my experience is the best and the optimal results you get if you mount a Leica lens on a Leica camera body, because the optics are just optimized and calculated for the Leica M sensors. And that's how I most often use my Leica cameras, just with Leica lenses, and typically I'm quite happy with it.